Okay, in this video, we are going to talk about other things we can do with a quadratic equation. And the main other thing, besides finding the vertex, which would be the minimum or the maximum, is finding the zeros of the quadratic. And the zeros are also known as the x-intercepts. So it's where the graph crosses the x-axis, also known as the solutions to the equation, because you're solving for x, or the roots of the equation. So please make sure you understand that finding the x-intercepts or the zeros or the solutions or the roots or solving the quadratic is all the same thing, okay? So when we take a look at an equation, if it's in standard form, okay, that's actually a good way to find the x-intercepts. So my first preference for finding the solutions, x-intercepts, etc., would be to try to factor, right? And so to factor, we are setting the equation equal to 0, and then we are trying to break it into two binomials that when multiplied back together, when FOILed back together, will equal this quadratic, okay? So in other words, we are looking for two things here. These two things would need to multiply to be 2, and they would need to add to be the 8x for the middle terms. So notice that when you have 2 and 1, because that's the only way to get 2, if you add 2x and 1x, you're never ever going to get 8x as that middle term. What that tells you is this equation is not factorable, right? You cannot factor the equation. So you can then use what's called the quadratic formula. To use the quadratic formula, you have to memorize the quadratic formula. And so we'll write it down now. So we have x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. Okay, so, and of course, that is from the quadratic equation f of x equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So I would highlight those. Remember to memorize them because we would need to understand that the quadratic formula comes from standard form. That's where you're getting the a, b, and c values. Okay, so let's try it with this equation then. So our equation is x squared plus 8x plus 2. So we can see I like to write down the a, b, and c values first. Helps me accurately plug them into the equation. The b is 8 and the c is 2. It also helps me make sure I'm getting the signs correct because all of those could have a positive or a negative sign. All right, so then to solve using the quadratic formula, we're going to plug everything into the equation. So b squared, so I would just say 8 squared, that's 64, minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, so what you're going to want to do to simplify this is first find out what is underneath the square root, underneath the radical. So 64 minus 8, right? 64 minus 8, which is 56. And then divide that by 2. Okay, so at this point, you have to see, do you want a decimal answer or do you want a simplified radical answer? Right? Because right here, if you just need decimal answers, then you should type into your calculator -8 plus the square root of 56, hit enter, and then divide by 2, or you can use a parentheses on the top, okay? And what you'll get if you do that is about -0.26, okay? And then let's see if I have any room here. You would also then type in -8 minus square root 56 over 2, then divide by 2, and you will get about -7.74. Okay, so those is this plus or minus means there's two answers. So it's -8 plus root 56 divided by 2, get that number. -8 minus root 56 over 2, get that number. Okay, great. Those are our two solutions for x. So in other words, x is approximately equal to -0.26 and -7.74, and those would be the x-intercepts as well. Sometimes in math, you're going to be asked for the exact answer, and so you may want to simplify this radical. So radical 56, I think of 56 as 8 times 7, but 8 is also not a perfect square, but it has 4 in it, right? So 56 divides by 4, it's 4 times 14. So this radical 56, oh, let me erase that. Square root 56 is square root 4 times 15, and the square root of 4 is 2, and then leave the 14 inside. I'll write that over to the side in case you are a little rusty on simplifying radicals. So square root 56 is the same as the square root of 4 times 14, and I picked 4 because it's a perfect square. No other numbers are perfect squares in there. So the square root of 4, so that's the same as saying the square root of 4 times the square root of 14. So the square root of 4 is 2, and then leave times the square root of 14. Okay, so that's just a little helpful hint. Oh, and then there I go, trying to finish this up without actually finishing the problem. So now you can see that you have a -8 divided by 2 and you have a 2 divided by 2. So if both of these will divide by the denominator, you can simplify a little farther. So -8 divided by 2 is -4, and then plus or minus 2 divided by 2 is 1, so it's just the square root of 14. Okay, so this is also the answer. And you'll notice if you type in your calculator -4 plus root 14, you'll get this answer. And -4 minus root 14, you'll get this answer. Notice that we do not divide the square root of 14 by the 2, okay? We can't divide if it's one is a square root and the other is not a square root. Okay, let's do another example using the quadratic formula. If I can scroll down a little bit. Okay, just to make sure that you are solid on it. Okay. So in this example, okay, we have a bit of a problem because this is in vertex form, which is great for finding the vertex, but it actually isn't very helpful for finding the roots. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is turn it back into standard form. Okay, which just means we're going to multiply it out. So x minus 2 squared, that's x minus 2 times x minus 2, right? So x squared minus 4x, and then -2 times -2 plus 4, and then still we have this minus 3 here. So our equation is actually x squared minus 4x plus 1. Okay, now remember that if we wanted to, we could try to factor this, right? But we don't have anything that could multiply to be 1, but add to be -4x. Okay, so it will not factor. I always like to try to factor first because if it does factor, it's usually faster. Okay, so we're going to use the quadratic formula. So let's write down what our a, b, and c's are. A is 1. B is -4, and C is 1. Okay, so let's try our quad formula. X is equal to the opposite of B plus or minus the square root. B squared, when you square -4, please make sure you understand it's positive 16. Sometimes the way you type it in your calculator, it might say it's -16. Obviously, that's wrong. Negative times a negative is a positive. Minus 4. AC all over 2A. Okay, now what we would like to do next is just simplify what that square root is. So that's 16 minus 4. So that is the square root of 12. Okay. Now, if we type this in our calculator, we would be typing 4 plus square root 12. Hit enter, then divide by 2. And we will get about 3.73. And then if we do 4 minus square root 12 over 2, we get about 0.27. Okay. And then if we needed to simplify it and have an exact answer, then we're going to simplify that square root. So this is equal to 4 plus or minus the square root of 12, right? That would be the square root of 4 times the square root of 3, right? 4 times 3 is 12. So that's just 2 times the square root of 3. So 2 square root 3, and then over 2. And notice that we have both terms divisible by 2, so we can simplify that a little farther and get 2 plus or minus the square root of 3. Okay, so depending on what you're asked, these are both good answers.